is the Hindu editorial of the 3rd of January 2024, Wednesday. The first editorial article is titled, "The Global Nuclear Order is Under Strain." This is an article written by Rakesh Sood, a former diplomat who served as Prime Minister's Special Envoy for Nuclear Disarmament and Non-Proliferation in 2013 to 14 and is currently Distinguished Fellow at the Council for Strategic and Defense Research. What is proliferation? Proliferation is the rapid increase in the number or amount of something. Back to the article. To gain legitimacy, any global order needs to fulfill two conditions. First, a convergence among the major powers of the day, or coming together of the major powers of the day. And second, successfully presenting the outcome as a global public good to the rest of the world. The GNO or Global Nuclear Order was no exception, but today it is under strain. The next part of the article after introduction, Lessons of the Cold War. The GNO was created in the shadow of the Cold War with the US and the USSR, leading the Western and Socialist blocs respectively. Following the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis, when the two came perilously close or dangerously close to launching a nuclear war, both US President John F. Kennedy and General Secretary Nikita Khrushchev understood two political realities. First, as the two nuclear superpowers, they needed bilateral mechanisms to prevent tensions from escalating to the nuclear level. And second, nuclear weapons are dangerous and therefore their spread should be curbed. This convergence created the GNO. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, a secret back channel between President Kennedy's brother Robert Kennedy and Soviet Ambassador Anatoly Dobrynin helped resolve the crisis. This is part of how Cuban Missile Crisis was resolved. Back to the article. The first bilateral measure was the hotline established in 1963 to enable the leaders to communicate directly. The hotline, later upgraded into nuclear risk reduction centers, was followed by arms control negotiations as the two nuclear superpowers sought to manage their nuclear arms race and maintain strategic stability. Next part of the article, the Geneva Treaty of 1965. To control proliferation or spread, the US and USSR initiated multilateral negotiations in Geneva in 1965 on a treaty to curb the spread of nuclear weapons. 3 years later, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty or NPT opened for signature. It began modestly with less than 60 parties, but today it is widely described as the cornerstone of the global nuclear order with 191 adherents. This is how the NPT came into being. Next, the relation between India and NPT. The third element of the global nuclear order came into existence in 1975. India had chosen not to sign the NPT and in 1974 stunned the world by conducting an underground peaceful nuclear explosive or PNE. 7 countries, which are the US, USSR, UK, Canada, France, Japan and West Germany, held a series of meetings in London and concluded that ad hoc export controls were urgently needed to ensure that nuclear technology transferred for peaceful purposes not be used for PNEs. The London Club, as it was originally known, sounded inappropriate and later transformed into the NSD or Nuclear Suppliers Group, consisting of 48 countries today, which observe common guidelines for exporting nuclear and related dual-use materials, equipment and technologies. Though the Soviet Union and India enjoyed close relations, having signed the Indo-Soviet Friendship Treaty in 1971, the USSR was committed to upholding the GNO and a founding member of the London Club. The GNO has held reasonably well, particularly on two fronts. First, the taboo against nuclear weapons has held since 1945. It is a matter of debate how far the US-USSR arms control process helped preserve the taboo or whether it was just plain luck. But the fact is that humanity has survived 75 years of the nuclear age without blowing itself up. Second, non-proliferation has been a success. Despite dire predictions or dangerous predictions or serious predictions of more than 20 countries possessing nuclear weapons by the 1970s. There were 5 in 1968, which were the US, USSR, UK, France and China. So, back with the sentence, despite direct predictions of more than 20 countries possessing nuclear weapons by the 1970s, only 4 countries have since gone nuclear. That is India, Israel, North Korea and Pakistan. Even after the Cold War ended, non-proliferation remained a shared objective, and Moscow and Washington cooperated to ensure that Belarus, Ukraine and Kazakhstan that hosted Soviet nuclear weapons and possessed some capabilities were denuclearized. In 1995, the NPT, originally concluded for 25 years, was extended into perpetuity. On other counts, the record is mixed. Arms control did not end the US-USSR nuclear race. In fact, their arsenals grew from 28,000 bombs in 1962 to over 65,000 bombs in the early 1980s. But the dialogue and some agreements provided a semblance or outward appearance of managing the arms race. Since the late 1980s, the US and Soviet arsenals have declined sharply to below 12,000 bombs today, though much of this can be attributed to the end of the Cold War rivalry and the breakup of the USSR. The two nuclear hegemons shared a notion of strategic stability based on assured second strike capability guaranteed by the enormous arsenals that both had built up. This eliminated any incentive to strike first, ensuring deterrent stability or preventive stability. Arms control negotiations led to parity or equality in strategic capabilities, creating a sense of arms race stability and fail-safe communication links. For example, the earlier secret back channel. So back to the article. Arms control negotiations led to parity in strategic capabilities, making a sense of arms race stability, and fail-safe communication links provided crisis management stability. These understandings of nuclear deterrence in a bipolar world outlasted the Cold War but are under question. The third part of the article, changing geopolitics. How things are going on in the present. So into the article. Today's nuclear world is no longer a bipolar world. The US faces a more assertive China, determined to regain influence regionally and globally. This rivalry is different from the Cold War because both economies are closely intertwined. And China is an economic and technological peer rival. China has resented or have been angrified by the US naval presence in the South China and East China Seas. And since the last Taiwan Strait crisis in 1996 has steadily built up its naval and missile capabilities. Changing geopolitics has taken its toll on the treaties between the US and Russia. In 2002, the US withdrew from the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty or ABM Treaty, and in 2019 from the INF Treaty or Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty on grounds that Russia was violating it. The only remaining agreement, New START, will lapse in 2026. Its verification meetings were suspended during the COVID-19 outbreak and never resumed. Strategic stability talks began in 2021 following the Geneva meeting between Presidents Joe Biden and Vladimir Putin but collapsed with the Ukrainian war. Next up, last year, Russia de-ratified the CTBT, the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, to bring it on par or on equality with the US, raising concerns about the resumption of nuclear testing. As US relations with Russia went into a nosedive, the US is facing a new situation of two nuclear peer rivals who are exploring new roles for more usable weapons. Moreover, Russian nuclear saber rattling to warn the NATO or North Atlantic Treaty Organizations. Saber is a heavy cavalry or sword. So back to the article. Moreover, Russian nuclear saber rattling to warn the NATO and the US against escalation in Ukraine has revived nuclear concerns. The old definitions of strategic stability no longer hold. The Cold War convergence on non-proliferation has run its course. Also, nuclear weapons technology is a 75-year-old technology. The US has always had a pragmatic streak or practical streak shaping its policy approaches. It turned a blind eye when Israel went nuclear in the 1960s to 70s, and again when China helped Pakistan with its nuclear program in the 1980s. More recently, the nuclear submarine AUKUS deal or Australia US UK deal with Australia, a non-nuclear weapon state, is raising concerns in the NPT community. During the 1970s, South Korea began to actively consider a nuclear weapons program spurred by the US withdrawal from Vietnam. However, France withdrew its offer to supply a reprocessing plant to South Korea under the US pressure in 1975-76, and South Korea was persuaded to join the NPT. Recent opinion polls indicate a 70% support for developing a national nuclear deterrent and 40% support for reintroducing US nuclear weapons, which were withdrawn in 1991 on its territory. Between the 1977 to 1988, the US actively subverted or destabilized or undermined or lessened the effectiveness of Taiwan's nuclear weapons program as it stepped up a normalization of ties with China. As a nuclear victim, the Japanese public retains a strong anti-nuclear sentiment. But there is a shift visible in Japan's decision to double its defense spending over the next 5 years. During the Cold War, US's nuclear umbrella tied its European allies closer. Today, domestic compulsions are turning the US inwards, raising questions in the minds of its allies about its extended deterrence guarantees, especially in East Asia. Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan have the technical capabilities to develop an independent nuclear deterrent within a short time, given political will. It is only a matter of time before US pragmatism or practicality reaches the inevitable conclusion or unavoidable conclusion that more independent nuclear deterrence capabilities may be the best way to handle the rivalry with China. The GNO is for the time being looking increasingly shaky.